Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. There are questions that I deal with every single week, and a lot of these questions are a choice. Do we do option A or do we do option B? And how you make that decision will always depend on exactly what the decision is and what the unique situation is. Obviously, I've said that on this channel many times, but there's one particular decision that I want to talk about today, and that is the decision on whether a particular customer network stays on premise or whether it goes to the cloud. And I thought that what I might do here is just share some of the questions that I ask when trying to assess whether a customer is a good fit for a cloud deployment or whether they have needs that are better serviced with local infrastructure. So here we go. Client A. I think they would be a good fit for going to the cloud, somebody tells me. Okay, well, let's look at this. What data do they have? What data do they need is probably a better question right off the bat. Do they need just your basic Office documents, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, maybe some text files here and there, maybe a PDF or two? And how are they hoping to access that? Is everybody using Microsoft Teams already? Are we looking at the possibility of doing essentially a Teams-only deployment where Microsoft Teams is the only thing that the customer uses? If so, then if they only have a need for basic files, then maybe it's a reasonable fit to say they can put all of their files in Microsoft Teams. We do have some customers who do this. And then all they need is Teams. You log into Microsoft Teams, you have your files there, you have your chat there, and if you have a need for email, then you can get that through Outlook Web Access or Outlook Online, which is the same thing, or you can even have a local installation of Outlook and connect your email account to that if you want. Okay, so maybe that's a fit, but do they have QuickBooks files? Do they have other accounting packages? Do they have some old local application that they use for kitchen requirements or other things, and it requires local access to an Access database? Okay, well, that's not going to be able to go into the cloud. So what kinds of local infrastructure are they going to need? Do they need local infrastructure? Are they willing to pay the cost to put a virtual machine into Azure or some other cloud provider? If this application has to run Microsoft Access, then it's a pretty safe bet that this is a Windows-only application. So they're going to need a copy of Windows. They're going to need to make sure that that's licensed. They're probably going to need to pay for it on an ongoing basis. And then they're going to need to connect to it with some sort of secure connection, VPN or other such. Are people planning on remoting into this? Because if it's a client level of Windows, like Windows 10 or Windows 11 now, then you can't do a lot of concurrent connections. Maybe 2 at most, if you're lucky. Or are they looking for something that multiple people can remote to work locally with the application? Or are you looking for something where multiple workstations all have the front end installed locally, but they all need to have access to the main database? And it can be on a network share, but it can't be in Teams because that's in SharePoint rather than a proper network share. Okay, well, so in that case, if you have multiple workstations that are trying to access something and it needs to be on a network share, then you would need a VPN for sure to access a repository in the cloud, or you're going to need a local endpoint. If you have a local endpoint, you can't have everybody connecting to it using Azure Active Directory credentials. Because if you have an internet outage, then your Azure Active Directory credentials are only going to be valid for about 3 hours. And then that's it. Nobody can access this anymore. Maybe that's okay. Maybe if you're talking about something like payroll, then that would be a problem. While we're at it, if you have everything in Teams, they're going to rely on their internet connection. So let's talk about the internet connection. How good of an internet connection is this? Is this a fiber connection? Is it pretty reliable? Or are we talking about some industrial manufacturing facility which is in an area with, frankly, pretty crap internet because it's industrial and it's not a high priority for fiber deployments at all, and it's not even a priority for solid business class internet because these are manufacturing facilities. Most of their work is done offline, physically manufacturing stuff. So ISPs, they'll offer a connection, but it may not be the most reliable. It may not be the fastest. If you're going to put all of your files in the cloud, then you need to consider how reliable that's going to be. You're going to need to know how big these files are. If you're having to download and open a 500 megabyte file on a regular basis, or gigs of data, as some of our, architectural design type clients would do, then maybe that's not something you want to be downloading and uploading continuously across multiple workstations, working with these large files in the cloud. Maybe that's not what you want. Maybe a local infrastructure is better for you. Let's talk then about your other requirements. Because I mentioned, okay, well, maybe we need a VPN. What's the router like that's handling this internet connection? Is it something where we need any sort of web filtering capability? Is the customer one of those that wants to monitor everything that happens on the network and do gatekeeping on what sorts of content are and are not allowed into the network? And let me tell you, sometimes it gets pretty interesting when you're in a more religious-based healthcare environment. And they're like, yes, we want to make sure that we block all, access to the category drugs. You're in healthcare. Guess what your nurses want to look up for, dosage requirements and safety information and all the rest? Drugs. So sometimes you have to, work through your customers' needs and desires to say, okay, well, you want to block all of this, but I can tell you that your staff actually need this for work purposes. So maybe you want to think this policy through and make it a little more granular rather than just entire categories. But do they need web filtering? Do they need remote access into the network? If they need remote access into the network through VPN, do they need the ability to connect from hotels and possibly other environments where they have restricted outbound connectivity? Are we looking at providing access from basically home environments? Do we need to have two-factor authentication on this? Because I'll tell you, if you're connecting from a home environment where we don't have any way of verifying whether the home computer is, up to snuff with its security or just wide open because they let their kids play games and the kids want to download cracked software and aim assist and all this stuff, I don't know. But these are things that you have to keep in mind. Or is it a corporate laptop that they take home where we have corporate antivirus, corporate endpoint detection, and all of the other tools that we would use to verify that it's a clean endpoint? This is going to affect what kind of VPN we have there, as is the connectivity requirements. Or are we saying that anybody who's off-site can just go to Office 365? If all you have is a Microsoft Teams deployment, maybe that's sufficient. That reduces the requirements for the router. But then you go, okay, well, but what about maintenance? Does maintenance have any camera systems that they're trying to access remotely? Oh, yeah, that might be a thing. All right. So how about your building controls? Furnaces, boilers, other environmental controls, air conditioning, etc. Is there any sort of access that you might need, particularly in an emergency? Because if the emergency comes up and you say, there's nothing that you can do, sorry, that may not be the best thing. You probably won't get in trouble for it, because if nobody had the foresight to think about it, then it's a learning lesson for next time. But if you do think about it and you ask that, you need to ask the customer, okay, so think about emergencies. What kind of access might you need? Do you need the facility for us to be able to give you remote access for any reason whatsoever? Maybe yes, maybe no. So then you're looking at, okay, so web filtering is one component. 2FA for the VPN is a component. Connectivity for VPN is a component. How many users are going to be using the VPN or needing remote access to anything? That's a component. Redundant internet. Do you have a need for redundant internet? Do you have an alternate ISP that you even can use? Or is it just one internet connection and hope and pray that it stays up? How about backups? If you have everything in the cloud, you might go, well, it's in the cloud. You still need backups, even if it's in the cloud. So how are we backing up what's in the cloud? There are services out there that can do that, but you need to think about and specify them, or else you're going to need a backup and you're not going to have access to one. If it's on-prem, okay, well, how are we going to back that up? Again, we need to make sure that this is something that's available if something happens to equipment, or if somebody decides that as they're heading out the door, they're taking a bunch of stuff down with them. You need to think about these things. And if it's a mixed deployment with some data in the cloud and some data on-prem, you need to think about protecting both of those, because they're both at risk. How about other things? Oh, we've got this, one tool that has a local website interface. So we don't need to worry about an application. We just need to make sure that we can get to the web interface. Okay, but where is that web interface? Is it integrating with a local application? Is the web interface on somebody else's servers, like it's already a cloud service? That's no problem. But if it's just a website that you've been hosting inside the network, well, if you're going cloud only, you're going to have to put that in the cloud as well. So that's a server in the cloud that you're going to have to think about. Or you're going to have to think about maintaining some sort of infrastructure internally to host it. You're going to need to think about SSL certificates, because if you're hosting any sort of a web interface, if you're not securing it, you're not doing your job in this day and age. You need to think about integrations. Does this web service need to hook up with something like Twilio for sending SMS messages? Does it need to hook up with other outbound email systems so that it can send emails to people? If it does have SSL, and it had better darn well have SSL, then your router, do you have NAT reflection? Or do you need the capability to host a DNS zone internally so that people can actually get to it internally as well as externally? And if you're hosting DNS, is that on a server? Or do you have a router that can double as a DNS server, as well as VPN and all the other things that you're looking at? There are a lot of questions to ask, and exactly which questions you ask will depend on what the network is. If it's your network and you know all of these things, then that's kind of what you have to take into account. But if it's, in my case, a customer network that I am not on all the time, I don't know all the requirements, there's a lot of these questions that require dialogue with the customer, with all the departments, so that you can try and discover, is there this one weird thing that maintenance has? What's the accounting software look like for the finance department? What's the care requirements? If this is in healthcare, they've got certain regulatory requirements that they need to have taken care of for their job. So it's just a matter of going through and asking all of these questions and then trying to keep them in mind and design a system that is good for reliability, good for cost, good for capability, for future expansion, good for flexibility. If people decide that they're going to go in a different way, does that require restructuring everything? Or do we have something that had a little bit of leeway so that we can, just flexibly move this in a slightly different direction? And do you have all of your backups? How survivable is this going to be when something goes wrong? Because it will go wrong sooner or later. That's just a fact of life. So it's not as simple as, they only have a few files that they need and everything else is Office 365. There's a lot more questions that should be asked. And if you ask those questions, and yes, it's a small, 5-person operation that may not even have a physical office anywhere. Okay, well, if all they're doing is collaborating on handing office documents back and forth, and they just need a custom domain because they don't even have a physical office, and this is something that's a startup, it's just getting off the ground, okay, maybe a Teams-only deployment is the right solution. But if you don't ask all of those questions, then you risk setting them up with something that is not optimal, or doesn't meet their needs, or that is something that's good, but forgot that one little thing that just becomes a thorn in the side for the next 5 years until they redesign the architecture again. So, yeah, there's no absolute rules of thumb on things that must always be one way or must always be another way, with the exception of SSL for your web interfaces, because that's kind of a non-negotiable these days. But these are the questions that I would ask if I was trying to assess the various options that a customer might need. And another thing you will have noticed is that a lot of these are interrelated. If somebody just asks me, what's a good VPN? Okay, Well, my answer is going to change based on what router hardware they have, what deployments they have on the other end, the non-corporate end. It's going to depend on what files they're accessing, what applications they're trying to run over it. Pretty much anytime I'm asked a simple question, it just opens up into a lot of other questions because everything is so interrelated. So take your time, ask the right questions, ask more questions rather than too few. And make sure you're prepared to take the time to go through everything to make sure that everything is working together as a whole, because otherwise, I guarantee you, you're gonna find something that you didn't think about and that suddenly doesn't seem to work with everything else, and it'll be a real pain to have to fix it on the fly rather than having taken the time up front to plan it out. So there you go, a snapshot, such as it is, into how my thinking works when I'm trying to decide between a couple of different options for a client. And hopefully that was illuminating for you. Maybe you had some other questions that you were thinking of that I didn't ask. If so, feel free to tell me right down there in the comments section, because I'm sure that I can learn from you guys just as much as you can learn from me. So if we all pool our knowledge together, that's a win for everybody. And hey, if you have thoughts on other topics you'd like to hear me talk about, or things you'd like to see me demonstrate, whether it's on a computer or on a network, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door net admin, and we will see you next time.